Okay.
All right, excellent. Right, I should tape record it too.
Good.
Great, got your undivided attention. So thanks for coming to this press conference. And I'm happy, I want to thank Unker for organizing it. Mike Gravel was a U.S. Senator, represented Alaska from 1969 to 1980. His parents are from Quebec. He grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts. And in 1956, he drove cross-country in a station wagon and eating peanut butter sandwiches on the last stretch because he'd run out of money. And he arrived in Anchorage, and from there got into real estate. But his intention was always to run for office. And Alaska wasn't even a state yet; it was only a territory. So he got in there before he could. There was even a U.S. senator. And then Mike won in the state legislature, and he was Speaker of the House there. And from there, I won't tell the whole story, but he got elected to represent the state of Alaska, the great state of Alaska, and in the 1968 election. And, well, there's a lot. If you want to read the reason I'm here, you might wonder what the hell am I doing here, is that I met Mike in 2008 when he decided to run for president of the United States. And he joined the early debates, primary debates. And I began traveling around the country on the campaign trail with him and wrote a book with Mike called The Political Odyssey, published by Seven Stories Press. That's where Mike's entire story is written, but it's not just his life. It's really a history of the American defense industry and the expansion of American territory and the growth of presidential executive power, the overgrowth of it. Mike is best known for having been given the Pentagon Papers by whistleblower Daniel Ellsberg. And maybe not a lot of you are aware of that story, but in the mid-'60s, the Pentagon commissioned several people to write an honest, classified study of the Vietnam War. And it concluded that not only had the French had their butts kicked, but the U.S. was as well, and there was really no way for them to win this war. But President Johnson and then President Nixon did not tell the American people this. They were letting Americans believe that they had a chance to win. And Dan Ellsberg, who was one of the authors, saw, and he had been an early supporter of the war, saw that people were dying on both sides in vain. So he leaked the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times, and they started publishing them. And he also went to the U.S. Senate to try to give the papers to a U.S. senator, because in the U.S. Constitution, any member of Congress in the middle of a legislative act, either in the Capitol or anywhere else, is allowed to read any classified information he wants and not be even questioned by authorities. So they have immunity. None of the U.S. senators that Ellsberg went to had the guts to accept the papers, except Mike Gravel. And Mike read them in a committee hearing. And the next day, the Supreme Court, which decided in favor of the New York Times, because the government had stopped publication, and that was considered prior restraint by the Supreme Court, and that's illegal in the U.S. You can sue, you could prosecute afterward if you publish classified information, but you can't stop in advance a newspaper from publishing. So it was a great victory for the press, and it was a great victory for the American people that Mike read the papers and then they were published. And then the full set of papers was published in a book by Beacon Press, the Senator Mike Gravel edition. And there was an afterword by Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn. So I met Mike in 2008. He ran for president. He was up there on the stage at the first few debates, and he really let Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama have it. And he got some attention at the time because of his outspokenness, which we're going to hear more of today. Mike's living in San Francisco area now, and he's as sharp. I heard him speak the other day. He's as sharp as he was in 2008, and probably when he was in the Senate. So I will now introduce Senator Mike Gravel.
Thank you very much, Joe. And thank you for your attending. I really want to make clear, because I'm very critical of United States policy, very critical. But I want to make clear that I love my country like everybody else loves their country. However, I consider myself a citizen of the world before I'm a citizen of the United States. And my priorities are in that order, because there's no difference really between us as individuals, regardless of where we live, where we come from, what our race, what our religion, what have you. I want to talk about our foreign policy, which is horrible. I don't have to tell you that in the last few decades that the United States has sort of ravaged the Middle East and other parts of the world with our desire for hegemon. And it's ridiculous, because we beat our chest and say, oh, we're superior people. Of course we're not. And what we want to do is we're going to bring democracy. Well, our democracy here in the United States is faltering right now. So our trajectory to bring democracy to other people, particularly at the barrel of a gun, is just a ridiculous undertaking. I want to just share with you, and I think you'll enjoy it. As you know, our policy has been, foreign policy has been promulgated primarily by the neocons. This is Richard Pearl, Douglas Fay, Robert Kagan, whose wife is Victoria Nuland, who was started out with the Reagan and Bush, and then kept on by Obama. And so there's been no real substantive difference in our foreign policy since 1998, when the neocons published their document asking Bill Clinton to go ahead and try to invade Iraq, invade Lebanon, invade Syria, invade Iran, and to the surprise of many, also invade Saudi Arabia, so that we could have full control of the economic sinews of the planet, and we would be the hegemon, and we'd back this up by our military power. That's the concept. I just want to give you one other thing that shows you how ridiculous our situation is. As you know, we in the United States, we have the Institute for Peace, and it's funded by the taxpayers. It's appropriated by Congress. And we have the National Endowment for Democracy, and then the U.S. Agency for International Development. All of those institutions are really focused on one thing: making the United States a greater empire and making us the hegemon of the world. Now, to show you how ridiculous and Orwellian the concept is that the institution of peace, which was funded in 1984 under Ronald Reagan, board includes Stephen Hadley. Now, I'm sure you've know of him, but he's the chairman. Now, he's the one that has been urging bombing Syria. That's the head of the Institute of Peace in the United States. He's also has been the one that's promulgating the militarization of the Ukraine so that we could start another war there. Now that's what we're doing. Make no mistake about that. And then he encourages European nations to double their military spending. Now, in case you're not aware of it, NATO is nothing but the globalization of the military-industrial complex. And as such, it's ridiculous. Its existence is ridiculous. There's no threat against Europe right now, other than what they create. Another member is Eric. He's of the board on the Peace Institute, I might say, is undersecretary from the Pentagon, and has been pushing for higher military spending, an attack on Iraq, and putting nuclear weapons on the border of Russia. I could go on our foreign policy, but I think many of you are as knowledgeable as I am about how bad it is. And it really, for a patriotic American who understands this is terrible. It's an embarrassment beyond belief. Now, let me point to, because I don't have any solution within the United States. I'll be very candid with you, I don't have any hope, particularly now that we have the Supreme Court weighing in on monies from corporate interest to be used in election campaigns. And so you'll see billions and billions of dollars that will be spent, and all it will be is to sustain the power of Wall Street and coupled with the military-industrial complex, and you get a ridiculous situation like what we have right now in our health care. As you know, we have, in the industrial world, one of the worst healthcare systems in the world in terms of delivery. Now, we do have pockets of progressive science, but it's just that. There are pockets. The broad spectrum is that we have 3 times the cost, and we don't have the success of other industrialized. When what it's called now, the Obama legislation came out of the House committee, at that particular time, 70% of the American people in a poll wanted single-payer health care, and it didn't even come out of the committee. There was no option for that. And so we now have this Obamacare, which is nothing but a designed healthcare system to sustain the insurance industry in the United States and the pharmaceutical industry in the United States. It will obviously fall flat on its face at some point, and will get some degree of sanity and follow some of these other countries. But let me point to you, since I don't, I wish I did, have a hope that the solution would come out of the United States. I don't. And so in looking abroad, I have come across where I think the most significant solution in the world is taking place. And that, of course, is from China. What we have is a situation, China is in an economic ascendancy. And there's no question, it's just a period of time. All of this, and I'll use the word crap, that's talking about the fluctuations in the stocks, and China is as solid as it comes economically. And it's a meritocracy system. And so we could talk about the nature of governance. I can disparage our nature of governance. I don't need to disparage any other nations of government. But I want to say that what China has come out with, which is the Silk Road, Silk Road, one road, one belt. Now, don't get confused. There was an American Silk Road, and that was legislation passed in the Congress of the United States in 1998 that said that the area from China under the underbelly of the Russia all the way to Europe, that is America's vital strategic interest. That's the Pentagon Silk Road, which is absolutely ridiculous. And of course, we've been trying to make deals to bring in our military and position them on that Pentagon Silk Road. But this is the Silk Road that has nothing to do with militarism. This is a Silk Road that's designed to unify economically the Asian and the European continents through Eurasia. And it would be a system of rail transportation, of roads, of investment on the way through that process, and then going down vertically to the various extensions of that into Arabia, into Iran, and so when you look at the total plan, and the organization for it was EIR, the Executive Intelligence Report, they've put out a booklet of this, which is just fantastic in the details that it has. But this comes from China. So here's what China is doing. It works to their self-interest, obviously, because they have overcapacity in aluminum and steel and other areas. And so, and they've been able to shift their economy from a manufacturing-based economy to a service economy. That's about 3 years in place. And so what they now realize is they have all this capacity, they have all this talent, and now what they want to use is to invite the world to join with them and to build this belt, one road, across the Eurasian continent, and with extensions into the other continents of the world. For me, and there's no hegemonic plan involved. You come in, you join them, and there's no requirements that you have to agree with every facet of their policy. Now, what they have succeeded in doing is, of course, unifying the BRICS, which is, of course, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And the BRICS are also advancing financial institutions to counter what is happening with the IMF and the World Bank. In which I might say, I can recall one instance when the U.S. wanted a vote in the United Nations when they were hammering everybody and saying, look, you're going to vote with us or else. Well, what the or else was, you'll never see a loan out of the IMF if you don't vote for us in the UN. And of course, we've led the UN and we've led the European nations, and I hope they'll begin to wake up, particularly with the sanctions with Russia. Who's carrying that burden? The Europeans. And they're stupid to carry it because there's no threat out of Russia in the. And here, I don't have to point out to you, you know it as well as I do, that it was the United States and Victoria Nuland, the wife of a big neocon, who was the one that engineered the dismantling of a elected official, elected president in the Ukraine. And that just caused a real situation where I think Putin acted very intelligently, because what would have happened is there would have been a confrontation over the military bases, which are fundamentally very important to Russia, within the Crimea. And so what he did is he took over the Crimea. Obviously, there was a legitimate vote that the people wanted this, just like the people in eastern Ukraine would want to be part of Russia. But he's been very accommodating in that regard. But so you know a lot of this already. So I'm carrying coals to Newcastle, so to speak. So that's where I see the results coming forward to solve our problem at the United States, because our leadership, in my estimation right now, is defunct. And slowly the world is picking up on this. And as a result, and the Chinese leadership is not perfect, but right now I see it as the only solution of melding together the economic interests of the world, and that is, in my mind, the road to peace. General Flynn was recently interviewed. He's the former intelligence director on the Security Council and also very active. And he was interviewed, and he was admitting the failure of the military in many of our undertakings. And he said, and you've heard this from other military men, well, we failed because the basis of what we need to have is we need to have these people outside of poverty. We need to have these economics flourish, and then we'll be able to function well. Well, of course, that's an oxymoron. We need them to flourish, but not at the barrel of a gun. And so what he was admitting was that the only answer that he could see as a military person in the field was some force to unify the world economically and not rely on militarism. And that's, of course, what the Silk Road, one belt, one road, is all about. And so what our policies have been in the Eastern European area against Russia, all it's done is brought about a rapprochement between China and Russia, and an effort by the BRICS to set up alternate developmental institutions without any strings attached. And it's embarrassing that the United States tried to tell everybody, well, don't join these institutions. Well, everybody's making a beeline to join the institutions. The other is with the Iran. Here you had and let me tell you, the Congress is like a zoo right now. There's no question. There's several people in there should be committed. And when you look at it, here we are, it's 5+1. Major nations have arrived at a deal, but the Congress doesn't think, it's ridiculous to think that Iran is a threat to anybody other than satisfying their own friendships in their area. Let me tell you that the best statement that I heard was right after the signing in Geneva was by President Rouhani saying that finally we got an agreement that will deny nuclear weapons to Iran when we don't want them. They never wanted them. And this was as a result of a fatwa from the Ayatollah Khomeini right at the beginning of the war with Iraq, which of course we instigated. And when I was in Tehran, I visited their war museum, and wasn't it interesting that there was a plaque denigrating Iran because everybody in the world was opposed to them, and that was because of our leadership, the U.S. leadership in the United Nations. And they featured this plaque with pride. You know what we've really done for Iran with our sanctions, which of course were illegal because there never was a threat? We've made the most independent nation in the world because they don't depend upon anybody. Most people don't realize that Iran has missiles, has jets, has unbelievable prosperity, but it's all internal. Now, of course, they want the sanctions relieved because what it'll permit them to grow faster. Now, here's the situation you have. The Congress is ripping its guts out with its foolishness over the Iran deal, and you get a delegation with the foreign minister of France going over with over 200 business people going to Tehran and sitting down and salivate, just drooling over the possibility of having some economic contact with Iran. Now, after that, you had the Italian delegation. And then you had a German delegation, and then you had a British delegation. So these are our allies, and that business community is going over. So the only thing that the Congress is going to do is going to deny the American business community from going over and profiting from economic interchanges with Iran. Does it get any stupider than that? I can't define that any better than that. So let me, I've jumped around on this. I obviously have a cold, and I'd be happy to answer your individual questions. So that would make it easier. Sir, please.
Thank you very much for this very interesting preview of your lecture today. My name is Nizar Aboud of Al Mayadeen Television from Lebanon. The question is, there is an ongoing conflict now in Yemen. And in this conflict, the American position looks very vague. They are not pro that conflict openly. They criticize it in different ways. However, they keep selling the Saudis, and they are part of the coalition against Yemen. How do you read the situation there? And do you believe that this conflict can be brought to an end soon?
It can only be brought to an end if you can get the Saudis out of the picture. What the American press, mainstream press, carries it as that this is something that Iran is instigating through their Shia contacts, but no, it's Saudi Arabia. If you'll notice, the first really military reaction that I noticed of Saudi Arabia was when they went into Bahrain and crushed them, which was part of the Arab awakening, and the Shias in Bahrain, and the United States, of course, who's advocating democracy in words in other places, but when it came to Bahrain, we didn't say a word. We didn't say boo. Saudi Arabia is a really interesting problem because they have Wahhabism, and the Wahhabist has two branches. One is a little more accommodating and peaceful than the other, but the one that carries the day through the leadership. And it's not a formal government leadership. It's, as in Saudi Arabia, they divvy up the money at the top level. You don't have to be in royalty to get your check, but they divvy up the money, and the older generation have used this money to fund educational institutions in the various madrasas across the world. And that was the most radical Wahhabist view. And that has done more, in my mind, to radicalize the Islamic world than anything else. And so our, quote, greatest ally, if you notice when President Obama came back from India, he made an unscheduled stop in Riyadh to meet with the new king. And who met him at Riyadh? Schultz, Kissinger, a delegation, unbelievable number of leaders to essentially pay homage to the new king. And all I can say is that we are so mesmerized by the fact of their oil reserves, and they've accommodated our interest over the years, except when I was in office, because that's when we had the embargo, and they were party to that. So the answer to the short answer to your question, I think that I don't see any solution, because I don't think the United States would exercise its power, whatever it has, over Saudi Arabia to extract them from that Yemen conflict. And I can't speak very thoroughly to the Yemeni threat to the Arab Peninsula. I'm not knowledgeable enough about that facet of it. Okay, we'll start with you, and I'll come to you.
Thank you very much, Senator. My name is Curtis Ellis with WorldNet Daily. We just spoke about how Mr. Obama was met by Mr. Kissinger and Schultz. And you spoke earlier about the contiguity of our policy under the neocons, considering your courageous performance with the Pentagon Papers. I'd like your comments on this administration's classification, security, clamp down on information policies from the NSA to Ed Snowden, and talk about the most transparent administration in history. Thank you.
Well, the least transparent in history, the Obama administration, who campaigned on transparency. First off, with Snowden, I think he's a hero in my mind, and he's done great service to the world, because he's released what we have been doing in the bowels of our government. And it's interesting, we're always saying, oh, this country's hacking businesses in the United States. This country's doing this to us. The hacking's taking place from everywhere else but us. And we have the greatest hacking capability of anybody on the planet Earth. And so you don't think that we're not doing that. You know, when it's admitted that we bugged the telephone of Angela Merkel, we bugged the telephone of the president of Brazil, we're bugging everybody, and we've bugged the United Nations, various ambassadors, so we could get a lead on how they're going to vote on certain things. It's just preposterous. Now, that it's been revealed, and there's been no reaction. You want to keep in mind, there's been no corrective reaction. This power comes from the Patriot Act, and there's no effort within the Congress to correct the Patriot Act, and so we're stuck with it. That's the reason why I started out by saying I look from the outside for a solution. I see none from the inside. And now we take a situation like Chelsea Manning. Here's a 22-year, now, as you know, if you've watched Snowden talk, he's brilliant. He's a 29-year-old guy when he did this, and his concepts and his articulation and the way he was approaching this is in my mind, is brilliant. Now, Chelsea Manning was 22 years old. He was an analyst watching the reports coming across his desk, the daily reports of various activities within the military. And he was seeing this and saying, what the president is saying and what the military is saying is at variance from what I'm seeing. And so this kid had the presence of mind to understand the constitutional imperative that's put forth. And that is, when you're sworn into office in any American office, of government. You're sworn in to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States from threats from within and without. Well, when you have this activity going on in the military, that's a threat from within. And when you see all of the surveillance that's going on and the lack of transparency, that's the most destructive element of our society, of a democracy. That's our democracy. I'm reminded of the statement that Sakharov made about how the implosion of the Soviet Union took place. It wasn't because of missiles, it wasn't because of defense expenditures. It was simply because Glasnost and Perestroika brought down the curtain of secrecy, and now the people knew what was going on, and they saw the emperor with no clothes. And that's what brought out that. It wasn't the American prowess. It was the simple fact of doing away with secrecy that changed the fundamentals in Russia at the time, in the Soviet Union. And that's, of course, the problem with the United States today, and that is that our level of secrecy is beyond the pale. And I don't know any other way to say that. So you have a sense of my background. When I was 23 years old, this was during the Korean War, I had the good fortune to enlist in a burst of patriotism for 3 years, and I was sent to Europe, and I had been to intelligence school. And so I was an agent of the Counterintelligence Corps. I was 23, 24 years old. And so I was assigned to the Communications Intelligence Service. Now, that we used as our cover, the CIC, but that's how deep we were. And you know what we did? And there was only 2 military people in this organization. The rest were Germans. One was a second lieutenant, me. It was a position for a captain, but for the grace of God, I was assigned to this and not climbing a hill in Korea. And the other was a lieutenant colonel who we saw him maybe once a month when he was somewhat sober to come in and sit in an office for about an hour and then leave. And you know what we did? We wiretapped anybody we wanted to in Europe, and we opened anybody's mail wantonly in Europe. That's when I was 23 years old, and that was 1953, 54, thereabouts. And so is there a surprise that now we've built a bigger facility at Fort Meade to do this more effectively with the new technologies? No, not at all. Okay, I hope I've answered your question. I've walked around that gentleman there. I'll come back to both of you.
Stay on the Korean War.
Stay
and Korea.
Okay.
It's Rhonda Haubin, and I'm a blog columnist at taz.de, Die Tageszeitungs website. And I used to write for Oh My News International from South Korea. The question I have for you is, do you have a sense of what can help deal with the situation with the need for a peace treaty? Do you have any insight into that? And is there anything anybody at the UN can do as a second part of that? Thank you.
Well, first off, being a globalist, I feel that the only long-term solution is going to be a reorganized United Nations based upon population, and doing away with the Security Council and setting up another kind of agency, but not with veto powers. So there's no question. A world federal system is the answer for human governance. We saw this in our history, and I'll just speak to U.S. history. Connecticut, prior to the revolution, was having battles with New York over Western lands. And I mean pitched, physical, violent battles. And so we were able to unify the 13 colonies, and it was trial and error. And so the success of that, and of course, Lincoln's later efforts to make sure that it survived, that's the answer for the world. And it's not just the United States. We see this federation situation in other countries. It's essentially a basic concept from Montesquieu out of France. So the answer to me is from the outside. But since there's no leadership to do this, I don't see anybody on the Security Council giving up wantonly their power to veto. That doesn't happen. So what will happen is, as I see it, and this is only, I was mentioning that as you get older, you get a little more cynical about the survival of the planet. And yet I'm an optimist. And so when I got wind of the One Belt, One Road, that's the first major step. If you'll get a major nation, and it's not China alone, you're going to have the BRICS joining it, and you'll eventually have Japan and South Korea. And I hope the United States will wake up and rather than criticize it or try to block it, and join it. Because if we were to concentrate in the world on developing the economic underpinnings for a society of growth, that's the formula. Now, once you begin to get to that level, you'll see the subsidence of the violence in the world. And that will obviously, clearer heads would prevail, and at some point we would be able to take this wonderful institution of the United Nations. And I'm well aware of the shortcomings of the United Nations. I've written about this a long time ago, and it's like any government. There's the good and there's the corruption, and I don't have to tell you, you're probably more knowledgeable on a lot of it than I am. But I do know that the United Nations is the only entity in the world that can truly bring about world peace. What will facilitate that is going to be the Chinese plan that will encompass the economic interests of the world and bring about the diminution of poverty and set the stage for that. Now, this lady up there is really raising, and then I'll come to you eventually.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, she's from Egypt.
Yes, I am Egyptian, and I'm very happy to see you and listen to you talk again. Being affiliated with the Ramsey Clark and Mr. Lyndon LaRouche, this gives a great credibility that you're a real, honest American. And I want to ask you a question that is bothering me a lot. This concept that was brought to us by Mr. Kissinger, the depopulation of the third world, and this is the outcome of all his ideas in the National Security Study Memorandum number 200. I wish we exposed this. And there's something has to be done. And as I see that the world, the way the American policy, foreign policy is formulated is along those lines. This man should be brought to justice somehow. Whoever is implementing his theory should be questioned here at the United Nations. And I agree about another thing that you mentioned about the change of the United Nations. The preambular paragraph of the United Nations starts, "We, the people of the world." It didn't say "we, the governments of the world." I think we should bring back the preambular paragraph into effect, and we should have a voice along with the Security Council and implement the United Nations preambular paragraph. Thank you.
Okay, I want to go to you next, but let me briefly, and then I'll come. First off, with respect to Kissinger, I know him very well, and there's no question he's a war criminal, as would be Bush and Cheney, and should be brought to justice. But it's not going to happen probably in our lifetime.
Or theirs.
Or theirs. Well, I would like to come back to, because I know there's somebody from Al Jazeera that's trying to chase me down for an interview on Egypt, and I want to come back to Egypt in a moment. But this gentleman's very, very patient.
Thank you, Senator. My name is Masood Haider. I represent Daily Dawn newspaper of Pakistan. In the context of this, this Silk Route that you have been talking about, and the Silk Route, you say that the economic benefits of the Silk Route would eventually trump the nuclear, energy.
Hopefully.
Yeah, but basically that was your premise. What I'm trying to say, in that context, can you please speak a little bit about Iran nuclear deal with Iran And will that really benefit the world per se? Or is it denying Iran the right to at least explore peaceful possibilities?
No, I think that the agreement, as I understand it now, the agreement that's been reached in Vienna is very beneficial. I think it was not necessary. The sanctions were Iran never went after a bomb, and every single intelligence agency in the world has got no evidence that they sought a bomb, and that's even including the Mossad. So Iran's never been a threat, but now that we've put aside these ridiculous sanctions that were illegal, that's going to permit Iran to burgeon. I view Iran on a par with Israel in terms of a scientific community, in terms of a very educated population. Iran is a great contribution to make and has made in society. And Iran is not anti-Semitic, not in the slightest. In fact, I met, while I was there, a gentleman who is Jewish who's in their parliament. So I'm very optimistic about what this will do for the leadership of Iran. And I think that what will happen is that you'll see Iran play a greater economic role in the area, and it will be a beneficial role. I've always maintained for the last 20 years that Iran is a natural ally of the United States to bring about stability and peace in the Middle East. And of course, that's not the ally that we took into our bosom. We took Israel and we took Saudi Arabia. But I want to talk a little bit about Pakistan. I've been to Pakistan. I've been to Islamabad and Karachi 2 years ago. And I went to Pakistan because I was trying to add my voice, and you may have heard of it, the release from prison of Aafia Siddiqui. And I think it's criminal that this lady who was educated from MIT was put 5 years in a rendition prison and then released, and then was on the streets of disorientated, and she had 3 children that were arrested at the same time, and the baby was dropped and died. So can you imagine what would happen to a human being? You get 5 years of rendition, one of your kids are killed, you don't know the status of your other 2 kids, and then they release you, and she's on the streets disorientated of Kabul, and she's got maps of the United States tourist attractions like she's going to attack them. She's picked up by the Americans, interrogated in Bagram, and she was in the interrogation room with 6 American soldiers and her. Can you imagine? And what she's charged with, not with any jihadism, she's just charged with the fact that she attempted to kill an American because she got her hands on a rifle in this interrogation room, but then she's the one that got shot. She got shot in the stomach and did survive the hospital, and then was brought to Brooklyn, put on trial, and a judge put on trial for attempted murder. Now, attempted murder under our legal system is a 15-year sentence by and large. But this judge was crazy, and he sentenced her to 86 years. She's about 42 years old now. So if I can lend my voice to try and bring about her freedom and whatever state she's in, and bring her back to her family in Karachi, I would try to do it. And so I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for identifying yourselves. And if you'd write about that there is one senator who thinks there's a great injustice. Now, there's a lot of them. We're talking about thousands of people. But the de facto sentence of 86 years is no different than unlimited detentions in Guantanamo. And when you think of what that means, unlimited detention, that's what was going on in the Middle Ages. You know, the duke or the king or the baron didn't like you in the village, throw you in a dungeon and forget about you. That's unlimited detention. And that's what we're doing now. And it avoids the whole advance of human governance that was initiated at Runnymede. And all I can say is, well, there's just so much change that needs to take place. But thank you for identifying yourself, because I wanted to help Aafia Siddiqui. I know her sister and other people in Pakistan. In fact, she's the most famous person in Pakistan that I could tell. And the best thing an American president could do would be to pardon her, send her back to Pakistan, and the people, the ordinary people in Pakistan, would think this is a great favor to them. So that. No, okay, I'll come back to you again. Okay, right there.
Senator Gravel, I'm Carla Stave, Global Research. In January, economist Joe Stiglitz wrote an article called The Chinese Century, which was published in Vanity Fair. He stated that China is actually the #1 economic power and that it would do the United States good to perhaps learn from the Chinese model. And I would assume, and you may as well, that this would cause the neocons to be apoplectic. So the question is, several months later, there appears to be some kind of a destabilization of the Chinese economy. Do you think that there is some manipulation going on as a result of the fact that China is considered now a threat to U.S. hegemony? And then I have a follow-up question.
Okay, let me answer
Okay.
the first one. First off, China's fundamentals are as solid as the Rock of Gibraltar. What you're seeing is sort of cleaning out the trash, the speculative elements in Beijing and the private speculative elements in Beijing and Shanghai. And so with their markets. I wish somebody could clean out our markets in the United States, but that's there's nothing on it. That may happen, and we have no control over it. So no, China is solid. You know, the big joke in the United States was that, oh, we got these empty cities. They built all these cities, and there's nobody living in these apartments. Well, first off, they don't understand how these cities were financed and built, but they're filling up. They're filling up. You can take this, and I've always been fascinated by this statement, and that is that I know of no group in human civilization that's been able to take 300 million plus people and move them from poverty to middle wealth. When you look at that accomplishment, it boggles the mind. And so, and they had the benefit of being an authoritarian society. A person would say, well, that's bad. It's not bad. The United States, when you look at the robber baron era and the sweatshops, and when kids were 10, 12 years old were in the coal mines and deforming their bodies by shuffling their feet from big coal pieces to small coal pieces, that's the underpinnings of our economic system. And so that they've been able to do it in a command economy, and yet do it in such a way to benefit their people. I just have great admiration for that. I don't think that anybody can criticize other people's, unless you're dealing with an outright tyrant like you had with Saddam Hussein. But it really is embarrassing for the United States to criticize the leaderships of other countries that may not be exactly what we think is right, because ours is not exactly what we think is right. So that's, I answer your first question, so your next question. So don't worry about China in that regard.
Yeah. Second question is, you made reference to deteriorating economic conditions in this country, and there is practically a disappearance of the middle class, and it looks as though it's going to get worse. There also has been an enormous amount of military equipment given to the police, and there are some indications of not progressive change, but the possibility of a move toward a police state here. Can you comment upon that?
Well, there's no question our democracy has been eroded, and it's not just the militarization of our police. It's been a whole host of other things at the leadership of the country. Both, you just examine what the Congress is doing right now. It's absolutely silliness with a capital S, and it's an embarrassment. But they're doing what they're doing. Now, with respect to the militarization of the police, you've got to understand that that satisfies the economic interests of the military-industrial complex. And of course, wars do that. You can't turn around and manufacture weapons and not have them used. You got to have them used and then disposed of so that you can produce others. So it's a device to keep the military-industrial complex making a profit and with their economic activity. Now, one of the hopes with the Silk Road is that many of these military institutions, manufacturing institutions, may well wake up and say, hey, the answer is to go ahead and develop the economics and use our technology and our expertise to tie in with this economic unification of the world and get away from the military. I think some of the brighter ones will do that, but you know, you can't count on that. But I think that that's the answer. If you want to see, there's no way you can get the Congress to do this, because the military-industrial complex has take the jet fighter. Almost in every congressional district, there's a piece of it that's made in that congressional district. So when you challenge a weapons system, all of a sudden you wake up and you're making a speech and somebody a lobbyist tugs at your coat and says, hey, do you know you've got a plant in your state, in your district, that services this? So you want these jobs annihilated? If we were to stop the military-industrial complex in the United States, we'd have a depression. It's just that simple. So it's something that just cannot be done. What you have to do is to find a way to redirect it, use their enlightened self-interest to focus on where they can succeed in the future. And that's the beauty of the Silk Road, is that people will see the success of this and the expansion of it, and they'll say, hey, we got to get a piece of that action. And so we've got to stop thinking in terms of making more jets or more tanks and use our technology to enhance the various systems that are going to be developed. And they're going to be tremendous. You know, maglev, you know, you're talking about a train that can go 300 miles an hour. And so we have très grande vitesse, and then we have maglev, and that's just the beginning. That's just the beginning. And of course, the canal across Nicaragua will essentially be a sea level canal. Now, I was an advocate of that, not Nicaragua, but Panama should have changed their canal and dug right down and made a sea level, but it didn't happen. So that's where we're at.
Mike, and I want to know if I could intervene with a question here to follow up on Carla with the eradication of middle-class lives in America and racist attacks by police. Do you think that the militarization of police is to prepare for a social unrest? If there's an uprising, the cops there have military equipment to put it down.
Well, there's no question. You saw this with the Wall Street protest, the young kids. I'd spoken to various ones around the world, in fact. But you saw how quickly they were snuffed out when the government decided, well, we've had enough of this crap. That's it, you're done. And so